At 60, everything changes spiritually. Carl Jung once said, "We cannot live the afternoon of life according to the program of life's morning." At 60, life takes on a new spiritual dimension, one that calls us to reflect, release, and rise into deeper wisdom. This is not the end of vitality, but the awakening of a richer chapter where spirituality becomes our greatest guide. In this video on spiritual wisdom, we'll explore why everything changes spiritually at 60 and how embracing these truths can bring peace, growth, and happiness. What about you? Have you noticed how aging has shifted your inner perspective? Share your thoughts in the comments below. I'd love to hear your experience. 1. The hidden curve of life at 60. Around the age of 60, something quiet but extraordinary begins to unfold within the human spirit. Outwardly, life may appear steady, familiar, even ordinary. The body slows a little. The pace of days feels calmer, and emotions soften into simplicity. Yet inside, a subtle axis turns. The soul begins to reorient itself, no longer clinging to the urgency of ambition or the constant desire to prove its worth. What once mattered, the applause, the titles, the endless race for achievement, starts to lose its hold. Instead, the soul leans inward, seeking the forgotten essence, the hidden treasures of meaning that were overlooked in the first half of life. Carl Jung captured this truth when he wrote, "The afternoon of life must also have a significance of its own and cannot be merely a pitiful appendage to life's morning." At 60, you are stepping into that afternoon. And this transition is not just natural, it is deeply spiritual. This hidden curve does not arrive with drama, but with whispers. It gently erases the illusion that survival and recognition are the ultimate goals. You may notice yourself no longer needing to please others, no longer desperate to fit into roles designed by society. The very hunger that once drove you forward now transforms into a different kind of intelligence, an intelligence rooted in spiritual wisdom, reflection, and truth. Jung explained that the first half of life is about building, gathering possessions, shaping identity, securing place and purpose in the outer world. Yet the second half of life demands something else. It calls for integration, for balance, for the courage to turn inward. As he said, "What was great in the morning will be little in the evening, and what in the morning was true will in the evening have become a lie." This is not decline, it is awakening. The shift at 60 is not about giving up, but about tuning in. It is an invitation to see life from a higher vantage point, to measure your days not by productivity, but by presence. It is the season when wisdom outweighs ambition, when authenticity matters more than approval, and when the intelligence of the heart surpasses the cleverness of the mind. You are not retreating from the world. You are rediscovering your place within it. In this sacred transition, you realize that the true journey was never about chasing recognition, but about uncovering the wholeness already within you. And so, at 60, everything changes spiritually, because life itself redirects you toward what is eternal. Old ambitions dissolve, leaving space for clarity. The need to impress fades, revealing the desire to connect. What emerges is a deeper hunger, not for more achievements, but for truth, love, and alignment with the soul. This is where Carl Jung's intelligence and spiritual wisdom guide us. The recognition that the curve of life bends not toward endings, but toward awakening. To embrace this curve is to discover that the second half of life is not smaller, but infinitely greater. for it is here that the soul finally remembers itself. Have you ever noticed that hidden curve of life around 60, when everything begins to shift spiritually? If you've experienced this transformation, share your story in the comments so others can learn from it. If not, comment, "I will discover," to open yourself to this deeper journey of awakening. 2. From ego to soul. The first half of life is a long construction project, building the ego brick by brick. But as Carl Jung explained, the second half belongs to the soul. By the time a person reaches 60, the structures of identity, ambition, and approval begin to crumble under their own weight. The masks that once served us no longer fit. The pretenses we once carried feel heavy. And what rises in their place is a soul that demands authenticity. Many interpret the deep fatigue that appears at this stage as depression, but Jung called it clarity because the soul is no longer willing to waste energy on illusions. What feels like an ending is actually a beginning, a turning inward where spiritual awakening reveals itself as the deeper purpose of the years ahead. In earlier decades, the ego thrived on proving itself, chasing recognition, building careers, accumulating titles, and striving to meet the endless expectations of others. Yet by 60, that urgency fades, and the desire to impress dissolves, replaced by a quiet recognition that none of these things truly define who we are. This is the subtle but powerful shift from ego to soul, a redirection of energy from the external world of validation to the internal world of truth. Though it can feel unsettling, even disorienting, this discomfort is not decay, but transformation, not decline, but liberation. Jung reminded us that the afternoon of life cannot be lived by the rules of its morning, and this wisdom is a call to embrace a new dimension of spirituality where meaning is no longer borrowed from others, but drawn from the depths of our own being. In modern life, the signs of this shift are everywhere. People at 60 begin to ask different questions. What truly matters? What brings peace? What is worth my time and energy now? The endless pursuit of possessions and status often gives way to simplicity, presence, and depth. Many discover the freedom to finally say no without guilt, to rest without shame, and to choose relationships, creativity, and inner peace over ambition. This is not the loss of drive, but the discovery of a higher drive, the drive to live aligned with the soul rather than ego. Spirituality emerges here not as an abstract concept, but as lived wisdom, guiding choices that honor authenticity, clarity, and peace. The very fatigue that once seemed like a burden becomes the proof of growth, a sign that the soul refuses to settle for the noise of the world when truth is calling from within. The journey from ego to soul does not erase the first half of life, but redeems it. Every challenge, every success, and every failure becomes raw material for transformation. Jung emphasized that wholeness, not perfection, is the true goal of maturity. And this stage of life invites us to gather all parts of ourselves into a deeper harmony. Shadows are not denied, strengths are not exaggerated, and wisdom is not borrowed but lived. At 60, spirituality is no longer an option. It becomes the compass. The soul no longer negotiates with masks or distractions. It insists on truth, and it insists on peace. What the world calls slowing down is in reality a sacred acceleration into meaning, clarity, and authenticity, where the light of wisdom finally outshines the demands of ego. 3. Integration of the past. At 60, life no longer demands that you chase after titles, cars, or recognition, because the focus shifts inward where the soul longs for something far greater: peace, silence, forgiveness, and the courage to face yourself without masks. This stage is not about regret, but about integration, a deep process of revisiting marriages, relationships, choices, and wounds, not to judge them, but to weave them into a meaningful whole. Every memory, whether joyful or painful, becomes part of the fabric of who you are, and spirituality begins to guide you away from ambition toward wholeness. The desire to impress others fades, and what rises in its place is the longing to heal, to forgive, and to rest in the truth of your own being. As you look back, you realize the past is not something to escape, but something to embrace. For every mistake has shaped your strength, every wound has opened a doorway to wisdom, and every broken dream has redirected you toward deeper truths. Old choices no longer carry the same weight of guilt or shame. Instead, they shine as teachers that refined your soul. Relationships once clouded with pain can now be seen through clearer eyes, revealing not only loss, but lessons that deepened your understanding of love and humanity. Integration allows you to gather these fragments and bring them home to the heart so that no part of your journey is wasted. Spiritual development at 60 teaches that forgiveness is no longer optional but essential. For without it, the soul remains divided. To forgive yourself is to free yourself, and to forgive others is to release the chains that bind both heart and memory. This is not weakness, but strength. The kind of strength that makes silence more powerful than words and stillness more healing than constant striving. In a world that glorifies youth and success, this stage whispers a liberating truth. Happiness is not found in what you achieve, but in what you accept, not in how much you acquire, but in how fully you embrace the life you have lived. Carl Jung reminded us that wholeness is not achieved by cutting off a portion of one's being, but by integration of the contraries. At 60, this wisdom becomes alive, teaching that both light and shadow must be embraced if you are to be whole. You no longer need to hide your scars, for they are part of your story, nor deny your failures, for they shaped your courage. Spirituality at this stage is about authenticity, living without pretense, walking without fear, and finding beauty in the truth of your own existence. In this sacred space of integration, you come to see that your past was never a burden, but a teacher leading you to the wholeness your soul has always longed for. Comment below. I honor my past and embrace my growth. If you are ready to integrate your life's journey and step into this new chapter of spiritual awakening. 4. Awakening of the inner self. At 60, life takes on a deeper rhythm, and what once appeared to be an ending reveals itself as a new beginning. The body may slow, the days may appear quieter, but inside the soul turns toward its truest essence. Carl Jung wisely said, "We cannot live the afternoon of life according to the program of life's morning." And it is here, in this sacred turning point, that the inner awakening begins. The need to prove yourself fades. The urge to compete loses its fire, and the fear of judgment weakens. You realize that the masks you wore and the roles you played no longer serve you, and the soul longs to be authentic, to live in alignment with its purest form. This transformation is not dramatic or sudden, but a quiet shift, like a compass slowly pointing you back to yourself. Jung called this process individuation, the journey of becoming whole. And at 60, it arrives with clarity. No longer driven by endless ambition or the expectations of others, you begin to understand that true fulfillment lies not in accumulation, but in release. Spiritual wisdom unfolds like a hidden map, reminding you that the soul does not age. It only deepens, expands, and returns to the essence it has always carried. What once defined success numbers, recognition, approval, becomes less important. Instead, the measure of a life well lived is found in presence, in depth, in authenticity. Jung's words echo powerfully here. Your vision will become clear only when you look into your heart. Who looks outside, dreams. Who looks inside, awakes. At 60, this awakening is unavoidable. You no longer chase the illusion of more. You savor the gift of what is. Every day becomes sacred, not because of how much it holds, but because of how fully you inhabit it. This is not retreat, but expansion. Aging is not decline, but refinement. The ego loosens its grip, and the soul rises in serenity. You forgive more easily, love more deeply, and allow your very presence to carry meaning. Life becomes about quality rather than quantity, truth rather than performance. In this stage, you see that the greatest treasures are not in what you own, but in who you become. At 60, you are not moving toward the end. You are awakening into wholeness, into freedom, into the timeless essence of the soul. 5. Embracing the shadow and forgotten parts. Carl Jung once said, "Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate." At 60, this truth becomes more visible than ever, because life begins to shift away from external pursuits and toward the forgotten parts of the soul. The reintegration of the shadow of those suppressed feelings, silenced intuitions, and neglected dreams emerges as an essential task. These hidden aspects, once pushed aside to meet society's demands, now resurface as possibilities, urging you toward study, creativity, or healing. The soul no longer obeys the world's clock, but instead listens to an inner call that cannot be ignored. This stage of life often reveals itself through subtle changes. The drive to impress others weakens, the need to prove oneself dissolves, and ambitions that once felt urgent lose their weight. What appears on the surface as slowing down is, in truth, a spiritual awakening, a reorientation of energy from outer striving to inner fulfillment. Spirituality at this point is no longer about belief alone, but about living with authenticity, guided by the intelligence of the spirit rather than the noise of external validation. Jung warned that when these whispers of the shadow are ignored, the result is stagnation, but when embraced, they become the seeds of renewal, creativity, and peace. Modern life can make this transition difficult, as it praises productivity and constant motion. Yet many people at 60 feel an undeniable shift. The corporate title or social status that once defined worth suddenly feels hollow compared to the joy of painting, writing, gardening, or mentoring. What might seem like a mere hobby is often the soul reclaiming the passions and callings that were sacrificed long ago. This is not regression, but completing the second half of life, asking for wholeness rather than ambition. It is the moment when spirituality moves from concept to lived experience, as the shadow reveals itself not as an enemy, but as a guide. These signals often arrive quietly. A restlessness when repeating old routines, a spark of joy when reconnecting with neglected passions, or a sense of clarity when sitting in silence, all point to the same truth. The soul is no longer content with artificial measures of success. It seeks alignment with timeless wisdom, urging you to step into authenticity. This inner voice may call you to forgive yourself for years of suppression, to create space for reflection, or to pursue a passion that once seemed impossible. To honor that voice is to allow the shadow to turn into light, to let spiritual awakening unfold as a natural part of life's design. At 60, the message is clear. You are not ending, but transforming. The journey shifts from chasing achievements to embracing wholeness, from proving yourself to finally living in truth. Spiritual wisdom teaches that the soul's intelligence knows when it is time to turn inward. And when you follow that call, you discover freedom beyond the limits of time, a peace that ambition could never provide, and a deeper awakening that carries you into the most authentic chapter of your life. 6. Freedom, beauty, and spiritual maturity. At 60, life begins to whisper a different song, one that invites you into a deeper state of spirituality and spiritual development. And this transformation often feels like a gentle unveiling of your truest self. Freedom becomes the essence of your days. You no longer feel the need to apologize for your choices, justify your existence, or chase validation from others. After decades of carrying roles, responsibilities, and silent burdens, you suddenly step into a new kind of liberation, one that is not about breaking rules, but about honoring your soul. This freedom is graceful, quiet, and powerful, and it is here that you finally realize your worth has never depended on the approval of the outside world, but has always resided within your authentic presence. True beauty begins to radiate in ways that no mirror could ever fully capture. It is no longer the fleeting charm of youthful appearance, but the lasting glow of wisdom, serenity, and depth. Beauty at this stage flows from the strength of your character, the gentleness of your spirit, and the calm authority of your lived experiences. It unsettles those who are still chasing surface illusions, because your authenticity reflects back to them what they have not yet dared to embrace. Carl Jung once reminded us that the privilege of a life. 7. Individuation and spiritual depth. At 60, individuation deepens in a way that feels less like striving and more like surrendering into your true self. You begin to reconcile with the wounds of your past, to forgive yourself and others, and to embrace both light and shadow as necessary parts of wholeness. The scars that once seemed like burdens now reveal themselves as marks of strength, proof that you have endured and transformed. Forgiveness loosens the chains of regret and resentment, and in that release, you reclaim energy that had been trapped for decades. Life no longer demands perfection. It calls for authenticity, for the courage to live honestly with all that you are. Spirituality at 60 is not a doctrine to memorize, but a lived experience that flows through presence, awareness, and peace. The frantic rush of earlier years softens, and time itself changes, meaning it is no longer measured by how fast you can move, but by how deeply you can dwell in each moment. Fear, which once ruled so many decisions, begins to fade like a shadow at dawn, and wisdom rises quietly in its place. This wisdom is not loud or demanding. It radiates naturally, like light breaking through the clouds. Carl Jung reminded us that knowing your own darkness is the best method for dealing with the darknesses of other people. At 60, you embody this truth, carrying both gentleness and strength, becoming more compassionate, less reactive, and more at peace with life's contradictions. Intelligence at this stage is no longer about accumulation of facts or achievements. It becomes spiritual wisdom, a higher form of intelligence that integrates experience, failure, and joy into a deeper understanding of what it means to live. You realize the journey was never about competing or proving, but about awakening. Instead of constantly doing, you discover the freedom of simply being. It is not retirement from life, but a graduation into a richer way of living, where reflection holds more value than performance and authenticity outweighs ambition. In a world that idolizes speed and productivity, reaching 60 offers a sacred counterpoint. The realization that true richness is found not in endless activity, but in presence. By embracing both your strengths and vulnerabilities, you embody a spiritual awakening that quietly blesses everyone around you. You no longer inspire by striving, but by existing fully as yourself. Jung's words echo here. Your vision will become clear only when you look into your own heart. Who looks outside dreams. Who looks inside awakens. At 60, awakening is no longer an idea you chase. It becomes your lived reality, a quiet and luminous truth that turns ordinary days into moments of timeless depth. 8. Living in truth and wholeness. At this stage of life, the soul whispers more clearly, and the old demands of perfectionism, control, and rigid roles begin to lose their grip. The endless striving to meet expectations or prove worth feels unnecessary, as authenticity becomes the true measure of living. In this shift, the heart opens to creativity, not as a performance, but as a natural expression of being painting, writing, tending to the garden, or simply watching the sunrise becomes a spiritual practice. Solitude, once feared as emptiness, transforms into a sanctuary of freedom where the soul feels most alive and connected. Relationships evolve as well, no longer based on convenience or shallow approval, but on depth, nourishment, and resonance. People who cannot meet you in this space may fade away, while those who remain reflect your truest self back to you. The bonds you now cherish are the ones that honor presence, compassion, and genuine connection. This transition mirrors Jung's insight that the second half of life is not about climbing higher, but about descending inward, where the ego bows to the soul. The surrender of ego is not a defeat, but a victory of wisdom, a recognition that peace comes not from achievement, but from essence. In modern life, where noise, performance, and validation dominate, this transformation is radical. To step out of the race and into authenticity is to reclaim your energy and joy. Spiritual awakening here means choosing simplicity over complexity, presence over distraction, and truth over pretense. It is saying yes to what nourishes you and gently letting go of what no longer serves. Perfectionism is answered with the quiet knowledge that you are already whole, and the urge to control is softened by trust in life's unfolding. Living in truth and wholeness means discovering that freedom is not found in having more, but in being more. It is the gentle courage to live aligned with your soul, to find joy in the ordinary, to savor the silence as deeply as the laughter, and to let each day reflect who you really are without disguise. In this space, life is no longer measured by titles or possessions, but by the depth of presence and the authenticity of being, where the ego steps aside and the soul finally takes its rightful place at the center of existence. And so, as Carl Jung reminds us, reaching 60 is not just a number, It is a doorway to a deeper spiritual awakening, a time when the soul calls us to live with greater wisdom, purpose, and inner peace. If this message has touched your heart, I invite you to reflect on your own journey and share your thoughts in the comments below. Don't forget to like this video, share it with someone who may need this encouragement, and subscribe to Spiritual Wisdom. And be sure to turn on the notification bell so you won't miss any of our upcoming videos filled with insight and inspiration. The silent collapse of critical thinking. Carl Jung reveals widespread collective stupidity. As Carl Jung once said, "Thinking is difficult. That's why most people judge." In today's world, flooded with noise and endless information, true critical thinking is silently disappearing. But what happens to our lives and our society when we stop questioning, stop reflecting, and simply follow the crowd? Here at Spiritual Wisdom, we'll uncover this hidden danger and why it matters more than ever for your personal growth and happiness. I'd love to hear from you. Do you believe people are losing the ability to think deeply for themselves? Share your thoughts in the comments, because your perspective could inspire someone else on their journey. 1. The disappearance of critical thinking. Modern society is slowly losing one of its greatest treasures, the ability to think critically. Instead of pausing to question, reflect, and reason, many people now accept surface-level opinions and collective narratives as if they were unquestionable truths. What philosophers describe as collective stupidity is not just a distant idea, it is visible in daily life, from the way people consume news to how they follow trends without ever asking, why? Or, is this really true? Carl Jung once said, "Thinking is difficult. That's why most people judge." His words reveal the uncomfortable truth. Genuine thinking requires courage, effort, and independence, but judgment, conformity, and blind acceptance are far easier. The noise of modern information overload plays a major role in this collapse. Every day, you are bombarded with headlines, posts, videos, and opinions, all competing for your attention. The sheer volume tricks the mind into shortcuts. Confirmation bias makes you cling to what feels familiar. Groupthink pushes you to agree with the crowd, and emotional reactions replace calm reasoning. When the external noise is louder than your inner voice, intelligence becomes dull, and wisdom is forgotten. Spiritual wisdom teaches that silence and reflection are gateways to clarity. Yet silence is precisely what most people avoid in today's restless culture. Speed is another trap. In a world that glorifies urgency, the faster an opinion spreads, the more credible it appears. But speed is not the same as truth. Quick judgments might soothe the ego's need for certainty, but they rarely nurture genuine understanding. Albert Einstein reminded us, the important thing is not to stop questioning. Taking time to slow down, ask deeper questions, and embrace uncertainty is no weakness. It is a profound act of intelligence. True spiritual awakening often begins with admitting, "I do not know yet," and from that humility, real wisdom can grow. Echo chambers further deepen the problem. Algorithms feed you what you already like, creating the illusion that the whole world agrees with you. It feels comfortable, even safe. But Carl Jung's psychology warns that growth only occurs when you face the shadow of those uncomfortable truths that challenge your identity. By seeking out voices that respectfully disagree, you expand your awareness, sharpen your mind, and develop resilience against manipulation. Socrates, the father of philosophy, declared, "The unexamined life is not worth living." Examination is not about negativity. It is about living fully awake instead of drifting with the crowd. Yet awareness alone is not enough. Practice is required. Start by consuming information slowly, reading one meaningful article deeply instead of skimming 10 shallow ones. Distinguish facts from stories and reframe what you learn in your own words. Then stress test your ideas. Ask yourself, what would a wise critic challenge here? And answer honestly. Most importantly, honor the mystery of life by holding space for uncertainty. This is not ignorance. It is spiritual wisdom in action, because the willingness to remain open is the foundation of growth. Spirituality and intelligence are not enemies. They are allies. Spiritual awakening is not abandoning reason. It is expanding it, aligning the intellect with conscience and inner truth. Jung's process of individuation asks you to integrate both the conscious mind and the unconscious depths, so that your decisions are guided by wholeness rather than by the pressure of the crowd. This is how you reclaim sovereignty of thought, by uniting critical thinking with spiritual wisdom. And so, the collapse of critical thinking does not have to be your story. Collective stupidity may spread like fog, but you are not powerless. One thoughtful choice each day, choosing silence over noise, reflection over reaction, honesty over pretense, can restore your inner clarity. By doing so, you not only protect yourself, but also inspire others. In times of confusion, the world does not need more loud voices. It needs wise ones. And that begins with you. Comment below, "I choose critical thinking," if you're ready to rise above the noise and reclaim your power of awareness. 2. Systems conditioning. Obedience. Education, the very system meant to liberate the human mind, often does the opposite by rewarding memorization over imagination and conformity over curiosity. From the earliest years, children are trained to repeat rather than to question, to obey rather than to create. And this conditioning is not accidental. As Noam Chomsky and John Taylor Gatto have pointed out, these structures were deliberately designed to manufacture consent and obedience. Instead of nurturing the fire of individuality, the classroom frequently teaches the art of compliance, dimming the natural spark of inquiry that is essential for both spirituality and spiritual awakening. The irony lies in the fact that the very institution promising freedom of thought subtly programs obedience, embedding within society a mindset that values fitting in more than thinking freely. As life unfolds, this conditioning merely shifts its form rather than disappearing. The media, once perceived as a vehicle of awareness, now largely operates as an algorithm-driven echo chamber, feeding individuals only what aligns with their preferences and shutting out dissonant perspectives. Rather than broadening horizons, it locks people into cycles of confirmation bias, ensuring they see only what comforts them, never what challenges them. Carl Jung's words ring true here. People don't have ideas. Ideas have people. Today, ideas are manufactured, packaged, and algorithmically delivered in ways that hijack attention and shape entire realities before a person ever pauses to question. The collapse of critical thinking is not loud or violent. It is silent, disguised as entertainment, convenience, and relevance, until individuals unknowingly exchange discernment for distraction. This process creates a society vulnerable to what philosophers now call collective stupidity, not stupidity as a lack of intelligence, but as the absence of applied intelligence. It is the phenomenon of brilliant minds dulled into passivity by systems that prize obedience. The danger lies in its comfort. No one forces this submission, but through rewards of ease and conformity, people willingly surrender their intellectual independence. In classrooms, students are praised for repetition instead of originality, and in the digital world, reactions are valued over reflection. The end result is a collective mind stripped of depth, unprepared to question, and easily manipulated by narratives that demand no effort to accept. Yet within this decline lies the seed of awakening, for spirituality reminds us that awareness is the great act of rebellion. To resist this conditioning, one must begin with the courage to ask, why? Why do I believe this? Why do I trust this system? Why do I consume this narrative? Such questions ignite the process of spiritual awakening, revealing that liberation is not merely mystical, but deeply practical. The daily act of reclaiming your ability to think, discern, and choose consciously. Critical thought becomes a sacred act, a way of honoring the divine intelligence within and living beyond manipulation. In modern life, this can mean stepping outside the endless loop of algorithm-driven feeds to engage with perspectives that challenge and expand you. It can mean teaching children the power of curiosity rather than the comfort of rote answers. It can mean choosing reflection over reaction, solitude over noise, and authenticity over conformity. Carl Jung reminded us, who looks outside dreams, who looks inside awakes. To look within is to see through the illusions of systems that thrive on passivity, and to awaken spiritually is to reclaim your sovereign mind. By doing so, you not only rise above collective conditioning, but also embody the antidote to society's silent collapse, an intelligent, awakened presence that brings light into a world dulled by obedience. Do you see how systems are conditioning obedience? If you do, stand firm in truth and declare it in the comments. I will not be controlled by the system. I choose spiritual wisdom. 3. Information overload and mental shortcuts. Every single day, the human brain is flooded with more information than it was ever meant to process. And under this pressure, it learns to take shortcuts. Instead of carefully weighing facts, it leans on patterns like cognitive biases, social proof, and groupthink. These shortcuts can sometimes be useful, helping us make decisions quickly, but when they dominate our inner life, they begin to quietly weaken our independence of thought. People start relying on what others believe instead of reasoning for themselves, and in doing so, they allow misinformation and conformity to spread almost effortlessly. Carl Jung once remarked, "Thinking is difficult. That's why most people judge." And his words ring even more true today, as many unconsciously choose imitation over reflection, repetition over reasoning, and belonging over truth. Social media makes this collapse even faster. A single trending post can shape the opinions of millions, not because it is true, but because it is popular. When everyone seems to agree, it feels safer to conform than to question. And this is the trap of social proof. Groupthink emerges when entire communities, institutions, or even nations adopt the same beliefs without daring to challenge them, repeating narratives that may be hollow or even dangerous. Intelligence, which should be the flame that guides humanity, is often dimmed to to blend in with the collective. Jung described this as collective stupidity, a condition where people are unaware that their independence has been surrendered. The silent collapse of critical thinking doesn't announce itself. It creeps in gradually, every time someone chooses comfort over courage, approval over inquiry, and acceptance over authenticity. This is where spirituality and spiritual development become powerful tools of resistance. Real spirituality does not only connect you with the divine, it awakens your awareness and restores your ability to think clearly and choose wisely. Spiritual awakening means learning to pause before absorbing what the crowd says, to listen to your own inner compass, and to ask yourself, does this align with truth? Does this carry wisdom? Does this nourish my growth or feed my fear? Spiritual development strengthens this discipline, allowing you to hold steady even in a storm of information. It teaches you that your mind is sacred, not something to be controlled by algorithms, mass opinion, or the loudest voices in the room. The message is simple yet urgent. Do not hand over your critical thinking to the collective. Seek truth beyond appearances. Question what you consume, and nurture your spirituality as the foundation of clarity. Intelligence is not measured by the amount of information you absorb, but by how deeply you can discern meaning within it. By cultivating spiritual development, you rise above groupthink, resist the seduction of false certainty, and live with authenticity and courage. In doing so, you not only protect your own mind, but also become a beacon of truth in a society that has quietly forgotten how to think. Stay connected with our community of wisdom by subscribing to Spiritual Wisdom. Here, we explore how to rise above information overload, awaken true critical thinking, and reclaim your spiritual awakening. Remember, you are not meant to drown in noise. You are meant to shine with clarity, intelligence, and inner truth. 4. Decline of reading and sustained attention. Digital media has reshaped the human mind in ways we often fail to notice, training us to skim quickly instead of reflecting deeply. The endless stream of headlines, notifications, and short bursts of content keeps us reactive but not reflective, fast but not wise. Marianne Wolfe warns that without sustained attention, true analysis and reflection vanish, eroding the very foundation of critical thinking. Carl Jung once said, "Thinking is difficult, that is why most people judge." And this truth echoes louder than ever today. When judgment replaces reflection, intelligence shrinks to surface-level reactions, and spiritual wisdom gets drowned in a sea of distraction. Every time you scroll through social media, skim an article, or switch rapidly between screens, you are training your brain to avoid patience, endurance, and contemplation. Deep reading, sitting with a paragraph until its meaning unfolds, wrestling with a complex idea, these acts strengthen the mind, yet they are becoming rare. Just as the body weakens when left unchallenged, the mind weakens when deprived of sustained thought. This erosion of mental endurance is not dramatic or loud. It is silent, subtle, and profoundly dangerous. As Socrates declared, the unexamined life is not worth living. Without the discipline to examine, reflect, and question, we risk drifting into unexamined lives, governed by noise rather than wisdom. A society that forgets how to read deeply soon forgets how to think critically. People without the habit of attention become vulnerable to shallow narratives, propaganda, and manipulation. What follows is the collapse of collective intelligence into what Jung described as the mass mind, where individuals abandon their own discernment and dissolve into the unthinking patterns of the crowd. This is not merely a decline in literacy. It is the silent collapse of critical thinking itself, and with it comes the rise of widespread collective stupidity. The loss is not just intellectual, but spiritual, because without reflection and depth, humanity loses its connection to inner truth. Yet the responsibility and the power to resist this collapse remain in your hands. Ask yourself when you last gave your full attention to a book, an essay, or even a single page without reaching for your phone. Ask yourself when you last sat in silence, letting your thoughts wander freely instead of filling every gap with stimulation. These small decisions shape your intelligence, sharpen your insight, and strengthen your inner life. To live with spiritual wisdom in this noisy world is to reclaim your attention, to practice patience with your thoughts, and to seek meaning beyond the superficial. Critical thinking begins with the simple act of paying sustained attention. Intelligence flourishes not in distraction, but in depth, and spiritual awakening requires you to slow down, focus, and absorb ideas until they transform you. Jung reminded us, who looks outside, dreams. Who looks inside, awakes. By resisting the pull of constant distraction and reclaiming the sacred space of reflection, you protect your independence of thought and awaken the deeper intelligence within. In a world rushing toward collective stupidity, choosing to read deeply, think independently, and reflect courageously is nothing less than an act of spiritual rebellion. 5. Emotional discomfort and ego protection. Critical thinking is not simply an intellectual exercise. It is a confrontation with the very core of who you believe yourself to be, and that is why so many find it unbearable. Carl Jung once said, "People will do anything, no matter how absurd, to avoid facing their own souls." And this truth reveals why discomfort so often sends people fleeing from inquiry. To think critically is to pierce the protective veil of the ego, to admit that your most cherished beliefs might be flawed, and to step willingly into uncertainty where the ground beneath your identity begins to tremble. Instead of embracing this path, people often retreat into tribal identities, clinging to slogans and surrounding themselves with echo chambers that protect them from having to change. These psychological shelters are not built on truth, but on ego protection, designed to silence the humility that authentic inquiry demands. In daily life, you can see how this pattern plays out. Scroll through social media, and you will find endless repetition of the same phrases, the same outrage, the same unexamined conclusions, recycled not to enlighten, but to validate. People cling to their group's narrative as if questioning it would annihilate them, because on a deeper level, their ego's survival feels at stake. But true spirituality, the kind that leads to spiritual awakening, asks you to do something radically different, to tolerate the unease, to welcome the disruption, and to surrender certainty in exchange for growth. Every act of critical thought becomes an act of spiritual wisdom, because it is not just the mind that awakens, it is the soul. The mechanism that keeps people locked in denial is cognitive dissonance, that inner tension we feel when reality contradicts what we want to believe. Rather than endure the tension and allow it to reshape us, we deny, defend, and distract ourselves. Yet the very discomfort we avoid is the medicine we need, for it reveals where illusion still has power over us. Jung's work reminds us that only by facing what is uncomfortable, the shadow, the contradictions, the blind spots, do we awaken to real intelligence. Avoidance may soothe the ego, but it starves the spirit. Confrontation may wound the ego, but it liberates the soul. In our modern world, this collapse of critical thinking shows up everywhere. In politics, people are quick to defend party lines instead of asking difficult questions. In consumer culture, people accept marketing narratives without reflection, buying into illusions of happiness. Even in relationships, people often repeat inherited patterns instead of questioning the beliefs that keep them trapped. Social media amplifies these tendencies, rewarding conformity, outrage, and shallow thinking over humility, nuance, and depth. But spiritual awakening begins the moment you decide to step out of the echo chamber and risk discomfort in the name of truth. When your beliefs are challenged and you feel that sting of resistance, that is the very moment you are invited to grow. Instead of rushing to defend yourself or escape into familiar narratives, pause and ask, what truth is trying to break through here? This pause is not just an intellectual act, it is a sacred act. It transforms your relationship with yourself and with reality. Intelligence then ceases to be about clinging to being right. It becomes about awakening to what is real, no matter how unsettling it may be. And in that surrender, you move beyond the ego's need for protection into the expansive clarity of spiritual wisdom, where growth, freedom, and true awakening finally become possible. 6. Social media and manipulation. Social media has quietly become one of the most powerful forces shaping the way people think, yet it erodes critical thought in ways many do not recognize. Platforms are not built to encourage reflection or patience. They are built to amplify speed, outrage, and emotional reaction. As Marshall McLuhan once said, "The medium is the message," and today that message is clear. What matters is not truth or wisdom, but virality. Instead of rewarding depth, the system rewards conformity, punishes thoughtfulness, and teaches people that the loudest voice will always be heard above the wisest one. The result is a culture where people no longer feel safe to express independent ideas because algorithms elevate emotional sparks over meaningful dialogue, leaving us with the illusion that popularity equals truth, while history shows that the greatest wisdom was often rejected at first. This distortion of values appears everywhere. Debates are reduced to noise, discussions turn into battles for attention, and opinions spread faster than facts because outrage fuels the machine. In this environment, Carl Jung's warning about the dangers of collective stupidity becomes painfully real. When individuals surrender their ability to think critically, they fall into the tide of the group mind, losing the independence of their inner voice. What could have been a tool for learning and connection often becomes a cycle of reaction, distraction, and imitation, where people trade away intelligence and spiritual wisdom for the fleeting satisfaction of belonging to the crowd. If you pause to look inward, the effect is undeniable. Hours spent scrolling rarely leave you feeling centered or wiser. Instead, they leave you scattered, reactive, and overwhelmed. Social media is not a neutral tool, it actively shapes consciousness, determining whether you move toward growth or toward passive acceptance of whatever narrative dominates the screen. True spirituality asks for awakening, for the courage to step back and question, to discern between what uplifts the soul and what merely consumes energy. Spiritual development depends on reclaiming this inner authority, choosing silence when noise is overwhelming, choosing reflection when reaction is demanded, and choosing truth when popularity shouts otherwise. The lesson is simple yet urgent. Do not surrender your critical thinking to algorithms designed to exploit your emotions. Slow down your responses. Nurture spaces where depth matters more than speed, and protect your mind as carefully as you protect your body. Ask yourself with honesty whether what you consume feeds your higher self or drains it, and act accordingly. In a time where critical thought is collapsing quietly but powerfully, resisting collective stupidity becomes an act of spiritual awakening. By choosing awareness over distraction, intelligence over conformity, and truth over virality, you step into the role of a conscious individual who carries clarity and wisdom in a world that desperately needs it. 7. Cognitive traps. Fast thinking, bias, groupthink. Daniel Kahneman revealed that the human mind often takes shortcuts through what he called fast thinking, a mode driven by instinct and emotion that helps us react quickly, but leaves us vulnerable when we neglect slow thinking, the deeper, reflective analysis that protects us from illusion. When we lean too much on speed, we stumble into traps such as confirmation bias, propaganda, and groupthink, mistaking comfort for truth and familiarity for wisdom. Even intelligent individuals are not immune, because intelligence without awareness easily becomes manipulation disguised as thought. Carl Jung once said, "Thinking is difficult. That's why most people judge." And this truth exposes why collective stupidity spreads so easily. People prefer quick judgments over the harder path of reasoning. Propaganda exploits this weakness by offering ready-made slogans instead of complex realities, while confirmation bias locks us into echo chambers that affirm our beliefs but quietly strip us of independence. Social media amplifies this danger by feeding us the same voices, the same patterns, until what feels like personal intelligence is only recycled noise, preventing real spiritual awakening and blocking the door to authentic wisdom. The more we surrender to the group, the more we silence our individuality. And this is where groupthink tightens its grip. Jung warned that the larger the crowd, the more negligible the individual becomes. And history proves this again and again as entire societies filled with brilliant minds fall prey to blind conformity. From political movements to financial manias, people abandon critical thought in exchange for the comfort of belonging, and in doing so, they trade their freedom for illusion. Spiritual wisdom reminds us that intelligence without courage collapses into imitation and fear. And what begins as harmless agreement becomes collective blindness. If you look closely at your own life, you may notice how often these traps whisper into your choices. You may have believed something simply because everyone else did, or dismissed an idea because it was uncomfortable, not because it was false. You may have stayed silent when your inner voice urged you to question, just to avoid rejection. These are not signs of weakness, but reminders of how subtle the human mind is, and how easily it drifts when not anchored. Yet this awareness is the first spark of freedom, because the moment you see the trap, you begin to step outside of it. Kahneman reminds us that slow thinking demands effort, but effort is the price of clarity. Jung reminds us that awakening demands courage, for true consciousness often means standing apart from the crowd. The truth is simple but powerful. You must guard your intelligence as a sacred gift. Question the narratives handed to you. Seek ideas that challenge your certainty, and refuse to let the roar of the masses drown the quiet authority of your own reason. To do so is to protect not only your mind, but also your spirit. For genuine spiritual wisdom is not about escaping reality, but about piercing through it with clarity. As Jung said, until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life, and you will call it fate. When you choose to slow down, reflect, and think for yourself, you step beyond collective stupidity and begin to embody a higher intelligence. An intelligence that liberates you, awakens you, and leads you into true freedom. 8. The spiritual dimension of critical thinking. Critical thinking, when seen through the lens of spirituality, is far more than the act of analyzing arguments or weighing evidence. It is the courage to look directly into the soul. Carl Jung once said, "People will do anything, no matter how absurd, to avoid facing their own souls." And this is exactly where the silent collapse begins. To think critically is to break free from the safety net of collective illusions, to question not only the world around you, but also the hidden motives within yourself. It demands courage to resist conformity, humility to release the ego, and detachment from the identity-based beliefs that keep you chained to the crowd. Spiritual awakening begins in that uncomfortable but liberating moment when you stop asking, "What group do I belong to?" and start asking, "What truth am I willing to face within myself?" In today's world, this dimension of thinking is more vital than ever, for information has become louder, faster, and more manipulative, tempting you to confuse noise for wisdom. Intelligence without reflection leads only to shallow reactions, while spiritual wisdom teaches that true understanding comes not from consuming more, but from pausing, questioning, and discerning. Each time you stop before reacting, each time you challenge your own assumptions rather than blindly echoing another's voice, you are exercising a spiritual discipline. Like a muscle, this practice grows stronger with use, and as it strengthens, so does your soul. The path is not easy. It requires patience in the face of uncertainty, strength to endure misunderstanding, and humility to accept when you are wrong. Yet this is where real transformation happens, in the silence between stimulus and response, in the willingness to sit with discomfort until clarity emerges. Spirituality reminds us that awakening is not about gaining new layers of belief, but about peeling away the illusions that have clouded vision for too long. Amid political propaganda, shallow entertainment, and the hypnotic pull of digital distraction, your soul longs not for conformity, but for authenticity. To think critically as a spiritual act is to refuse the easy path of convenience and instead align with truth, which always sets you free. Jung warned of the collective shadow, the darkness that grows when individuals abandon responsibility and allow the crowd to think for them. To give away your critical mind is to give away your soul. For individuality is the very bridge that connects you to higher wisdom. Spiritual awakening means reclaiming this birthright, daring to see where others look away, daring to speak where others remain silent, daring to walk the path of truth, even if it isolates you. In this way, critical thinking becomes your compass, your shield, and your liberation. It is the union of intelligence and spirit, guiding you toward deeper meaning, greater freedom, and an authentic life rooted not in illusion, but in the eternal light of wisdom. And so, as we reflect on the silent collapse of critical thinking and the rise of collective stupidity, remember this: awareness is the first step to reclaiming your power. Carl Jung reminded us that thinking is difficult. That's why most people judge. But you don't have to follow the crowd. Choose instead to question, to reflect, and to awaken. If this message resonated with you, don't forget to like this video, share it with those who need to hear it, and subscribe to Spiritual Wisdom. Turn on the notification bell so you won't miss our upcoming videos, where we continue to explore the depths of spirituality, psychology, and awakening.